In the name of God, the source of all being, the incarnate Word, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Merry Christmas! The note that is sounded on Christmas Eve is characteristically that of adoration and worship. The hymn that Anglicans sing all over the world as we come into these great Christmas Eve services is, "O come, let us adore him." And this is right. But this morning at 11 a.m., with over 100 angels up here and nearly as many wise people and shepherds and a donkey and some sheep and a holy family and a star, we heard another message that typically comes later in this story, and even more so at Easter. And that is not only adore him and worship him, but follow him. This was the message of the star, to follow him. So, the late Marcus Borg taught me this many, many years ago. He said that Jesus wants us more to follow him than to worship him. And I wonder what that might mean at Christmas rather than at Easter. Jesus said to his followers in the days leading up to his passion that if they wanted to follow him, they would have to take up their cross, that is, the burden of separating yourself from the way of the world and follow him. But what would it mean tonight, on this holy night when we celebrate a holy birth, to follow him on Christmas Eve? This is what we call, in the Christian world, the Feast of the Incarnation, the feast of becoming human, becoming embodied, becoming enfleshed, and living in this world. Like baptism in the great liturgical churches, incarnation we tend to think of as happening one time. The baby's born. He's incarnate, in flesh, no longer a spirit only, but also a body. But could we think of incarnation as unfolding through the life of Jesus? And could we think that we are being called to follow that path of incarnating, of becoming embodied in our world? Which I'd like to suggest would mean not only becoming cognizant, aware, reverent, caring of our own individual bodies, but what humans always are, which is social, communal, community-based. We are a political people, always. I know that's not great in church, but it's a fact. We are made to be in communion with each other, and only so can we be embodied. Only so can we be incarnate. So it doesn't just happen at the birth, as precious as that is, as beautiful that is. It happens as we grow and as we become more deeply human by becoming more enfleshed and in relationship with each other. But isn't that just a natural process? Doesn't it just happen? Well, yes and no. Every experience that I have that comforts me, that strengthens me, that encourages me, I think that does draw me further into relationship with the world and all that lives in the world. But there are other experiences, aren't there? There are alienating experiences, things that sadden us, that oppose us, that shake our sense of security. And those are moments, let me suggest, of temptation, when we are tempted to remove ourselves from incarnating in this world, to become more abstract, to become more theoretical, to become more inward and withdrawn. And this can, of course, as we have learned, continue to concatenate and develop. We can become more and more disincarnated in our world. The more trauma, the more terror, the more struggle that we face. So it's not a given, is it? It's not a given that we would incarnate. So to follow Jesus is somehow to be courageous enough to move through those alienating, abstracting experiences and still remain related to our bodies and our communities. I think Jesus did this. We can see the traces in the story of Jesus as a young man, as a fully grown man, that he was incarnating, that he was becoming more and more enfleshed in community. We can see this because it's clear he paid attention to all the elements, all the lives that were around him. And he loved them, no matter how different from him they were. He looked at a rich young person who was questioning him, and it says in the scripture that he loved him. He looked into his heart, it says, and he loved him, despite the fact that his life was entirely different than Jesus and that he was asking him questions that were perhaps meant to entrap Jesus. He cared for him and loved him. He also, I think, loved the poor. These were the people who came most to hear him preach, to hear him speak, were the people that we would call, they were not like him. He was from, if we would say, the working class. The poor would be the people that we know so well, that the United States is looking at San Francisco and in Oakland and saying that we have a problem. They are our homeless, our most destitute, our most vulnerable. Those were the people who showed up to hear Jesus the most. The multitudes that surrounded Jesus and heard him preach, the scripture says they were the poor, and they are the most poor of all. And it is clear that Jesus didn't have a theoretical, an abstract relationship with them. Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. He spoke from within an experience of their lives, not apart from them, not the same as them, but loving them. I think he also had this same relationship to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the people who really were his opponents. In this, I think Gandhi may be the greatest follower of Jesus since his time. Not a Christian, a faithful Hindu person, but who loved and revered and respected Jesus. And he said, the British are not our enemies. We have no enemies. We oppose their methods. We oppose their policies. We know them, but they are not our enemies. Jesus fought with the Sadducees and the Pharisees because he knew them so well and he cared for them, but they were not his enemies. In this too, he was incarnating. He was becoming enfleshed and connected to them as well. When he uses animals as examples in his preaching and plants, I think he paid close attention to them too. One of the most touching scriptures of all is, not a sparrow falls to the earth and dies apart from God. These are the words of a man who saw that happen and felt compassion for a small, insignificant life. Are they not only worth 2 pennies, he said, but God is with them. So he actually incarnated out to the whole world, to the earth. So I've been wondering how to tell you, other than through the life of Jesus, who might be like this today. And I thought of a person you probably know. You know her writing. You know her husband's writing. Arlie Hochschild. She is emeritus from University of California, Berkeley. Is there any cheers for that? I don't know. Stanford? This diocese is so great because it has all these great universities, and then there's other people as well. So she is a lefty. She and her husband Adam moved to Berkeley in the late 60s, in the heyday of all that change, and they embraced it. She taught at Berkeley for many, many years. She's a sociologist. She's as progressive as they come. But she got interested years ago, a number of years ago, when President Trump was elected, that there were people in the United States voting against themselves in terms of climate change and environmental degradation. They were voting even though they knew that these toxic waste in the air and the soil and the water were killing them and hurting their children. They still voted for people who denied that this was even going on. So instead of just writing about it from Berkeley, she went to the dirtiest city in the United States in terms of its air, Lake Charles, Louisiana, and she learned their lives. She went to their Pentecostal church services and their Baptist church services and their Roman Catholic church services, probably not Episcopalian. And she deeply immersed herself in their lives. She had dinner with them, she shared coffee with them, and she learned to respect and love them. I think this is incarnating. I spoke on climate change in Berkeley recently at All Souls Parish, and her daughter-in-law came to me. They were away, and she said, my mother-in-law is now doing a new piece of research. She's rocketing around the byways, the back roads of rural Kentucky right now to understand white supremacists, to understand their lives. This does not mean, just as it did not mean for Jesus, that she will approve of these things, but she will understand them. This, I think, is following the way of the one who was incarnate. So it's not too early, brothers and sisters. It's not too early to make New Year's resolutions. It's almost upon you. I don't know if you've started your list. Maybe you think that's a whole bad idea. They're hard to keep. But for 2020, I not only want to adore and worship Christ, I want to follow him. And I want to follow him in this way, to incarnate more and more, to learn the reality of life, not only my own and not only the lives of people who vote like I do and think like I do and look like I do, but especially all of life that God has made in its beautiful diversity. In this way, I think I will be following Christ in his incarnation. Again, Merry Christmas.